My name is Claire, and if you had told me that one December night I'd be banned from my own family's Christmas dinner, I would have laughed in your face. But that's exactly what happened. It wasn't because I had done anything wrong. I wasn't estranged, I wasn't a troublemaker, I hadn't burned any bridges. The truth was colder, sharper, and far more humiliating. My father told me, point blank, that my presence might overshadow my younger brother and his new girlfriend. That sentence alone still makes my stomach knot. Imagine being 32, building your career brick by brick in silence, only to realize you're still the inconvenient daughter, the one expected to shrink so that someone else can shine. When my father's voice came over the phone that night, it was careful, like he was trying to cushion the blow. He started with small talk, asked how my week was, and then slipped in the words that cut through me. Sweetheart, maybe this year you should skip Christmas. Jake's finally found someone. We don't want him feeling compared. Compared as if my very existence was some unfair weapon. As if me sitting at the table carving ham or pouring eggnog would somehow steal the spotlight from my brother's mid-level romance. I remember holding the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. I wanted to scream to remind him that I was his daughter too, that Christmas was supposed to be about family, not theater. But instead, I swallowed hard and forced my voice steady. So you're uninviting me. He cleared his throat, fumbling, not uninviting, just rescheduling. Why don't you come for New Year's instead? That was the moment something inside me cracked, not in an explosive fire and brimstone kind of way. No, this was quieter, more final, like the last thread of hope snapping in a storm. For 32 years I had told myself it might get better, that maybe one day my parents would see me clearly, celebrate me without condition, without comparison. But in that instant I understood I had always been the shadow. My brother was the sun, and my parents wanted me to orbit unseen for the rest of my life. I hung up that call with a smile plastered to my face, the way I always did when navigating my parents' delicate egos. But when I put the phone down, my apartment walls absorbed my silence. The skyline outside my window glittered with Christmas lights, whole families laughing and gathering. And there I was, excluded, diminished, erased. Here's the thing about being banned from Christmas: it doesn't just bruise your pride, it shatters something deeper. Because Christmas is supposed to be unconditional. The one place where belonging is not negotiable. And yet for me, belonging was revoked with a single sentence. I didn't know it at the time, but that rejection would set off a chain of events that changed everything. Within 3 months, my brother would walk into my office for a job interview, completely unaware that I wasn't just another face at the table anymore. I was the CEO, and for once the balance of power would be in my hands. But before I take you to that moment, before the twist you won't see coming, I need to go back. Back to where it all began, inside a house that looked perfect on the outside, but taught me early that love could be conditional and recognition rationed out like scraps. That's where the real story begins. From the outside, our house looked like the American dream. 2 stories with a manicured lawn, a golden retriever in the yard, and parents who hosted block parties with practiced smiles. Neighbors thought we were the picture-perfect family, the kind you'd see on a Christmas card. But behind the front door there was a story no postcard could capture. The truth, the balance in our family was never even. Jake, my younger brother, was the golden child, the chosen one. And I was the reminder that excellence didn't matter if it wasn't wrapped in the package they wanted. My parents built a narrative around him from the day he was born. He was special, fragile, destined for greatness. And me, I was strong, independent, capable. Capable became code for invisible. It started small, subtle. My parents never missed a single one of Jake's little league games, even when his team lost 15 straight and he barely touched the ball. They'd cheer his name as if he were pitching in the World Series. Meanwhile, when I qualified for the National Debate Championships in high school, I rode the bus there alone. No cheers, no proud faces in the crowd, just silence on the other end of a phone call later that night. My mother, always quick with excuses, told me she had a migraine that day. My father claimed he had a meeting he couldn't miss. But when I walked through the door there, they were on the couch watching Jake play video games. And when I asked why they hadn't come, my father's answer cut me in ways I still feel. Your brother needs the support more than you do, Claire. You're strong enough to handle it. That was the refrain of my childhood. You're strong, you're independent. He needs us more. It didn't matter that my report cards were lined with straight A's. It didn't matter that I volunteered, led clubs, built a resume any parent would dream of. Jake brought home a C+ in math, and they took him out for ice cream to celebrate. I brought home perfect scores, and I got a nod and the same tired phrase. That's what we expect from you. The disparity wasn't occasional, it was constant. It was our family's unspoken rulebook. Jake got second chances, sympathy celebrations. I got higher expectations and silence. The world outside our home never saw it. At barbecues and birthday parties, my parents praised me as the responsible one. They smiled when neighbors said how lucky they were to have a daughter so accomplished. But I knew the truth. Their pride in me was polite surface level. Their real investment, their emotional energy, their sacrifices, their unconditional love was reserved for Jake. And as much as I wanted to deny it, some part of me understood the mechanics. Jake played the role of the fragile project, the one who needed saving. And my parents, consciously or not, clung to that role because it made them feel necessary. Supporting me didn't give them the same validation. They didn't know how to parent a child who didn't need rescuing. But here's the thing about growing up as the shadow in your own family: it doesn't just hurt in the moment. It plants seeds. Seeds of doubt, of anger, of an emptiness that no amount of medals or awards can fill. You learn early that love can be conditional, that attention has to be earned, and even then, it might never come. Looking back, I can see it clearly now. But at the time, all I knew was that the house we lived in, the house with the trimmed hedges and smiling holiday cards, wasn't really a home. It was a stage, and I was cast in the role of the capable daughter whose triumphs weren't meant to be celebrated. That imbalance became the script of my life. And it set the stage for everything that came later, for the moment when my father would call decades later and tell me not to come home for Christmas. Because Jake needed the spotlight. Because once again, I was too much. And if you've ever been the invisible child, you know exactly how those scars can stretch into adulthood. By the time I was old enough to really notice, the favoritism wasn't even hidden anymore. It was woven into every interaction, every celebration, every disappointment. Take grades, for example. I was the kid who practically lived in the library, the one who color-coded notebooks and highlighted every textbook within an inch of its life. I would walk home clutching a report card lined with straight A's, proud, hopeful that maybe, just maybe this time, I'd earn more than a polite nod. But the response was always the same. My father would glance at it, nod once, and say, "That's what we expect from you, Claire." My mother might add a quick "good job, honey," before turning her attention back to Jake. Now picture Jake. He'd drag himself through school, never quite failing, but never excelling. When he scraped by with a C+, they'd practically throw a parade. "Look at that improvement," my mother would exclaim, as if he had split the atom. Dad would take him out for ice cream, slap him on the back beam with pride. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, listening to their laughter float in from the car as they drove away. My own straight A report card lay on the counter, untouched, forgotten, under a stack of unopened mail. That was the night it clicked for me, and our family effort wasn't the currency of love. Neediness was. The same pattern played out everywhere. Sports. They sat through every one of Jake's baseball games, even when his team lost 15 in a row, and he spent most innings warming the bench. I once begged them to come to my debate regionals, the competition that would decide whether I advanced to nationals. That morning, my mother claimed a migraine. My father muttered something about an urgent meeting. I rode the bus alone, walked into the auditorium alone, and won first place alone. When I came home carrying the trophy, flushed with victory, I found them sitting on the couch cheering Jake on as he mashed buttons on his video game controller. "Your brother needs the support more than you do," my father said when I asked why they hadn't been there. "You're independent, you'll be fine." Be independent. That word became both compliment and curse. Birthdays. Jake's cakes were store-bought extravaganzas, his parties filled with balloons and friends. Mine were quiet affairs, sometimes forgotten entirely. I once overheard my mother telling a neighbor that I didn't really care about birthdays anyway because I was so mature. Holidays. Jake got the best gifts, the gadgets he'd been hinting about, the sneakers he wanted, eventually even a car. Me, practical things. Luggage when I graduated. "For your journey ahead," my mother had said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The message was clear. Jake was the sun, and I was just a planet orbiting in silence, useful only because I kept the system balanced. It didn't just sting, it reshaped me. I worked harder, chased perfection, bent over backwards to prove I was worthy of the same celebration. But no matter how high I climbed, the ceiling never moved. My parents' attention, their energy, their pride, it was always Jake's by default. If you've ever been in that position, you know the ache I'm describing. It's the ache of walking into a room already knowing the applause will never be for you. It's watching someone else stumble and still get carried while you sprint and barely get noticed. And the cruelest part, you start to internalize it. I began to believe maybe I really was too independent, too capable, too much. Maybe I didn't deserve the same tenderness because I could shoulder the weight alone. But deep down I knew better. And that knowledge, that quiet, simmering injustice, became fuel. It would drive me to push harder, to leave, to build a life so big that one day the imbalance couldn't be ignored. Of course, back then I couldn't see that future. All I knew was the hollow silence that followed my victories. And that silence spoke louder than any applause ever could. High school graduation should have been one of those milestone moments, caps tossed into the air, proud parents cheering from the bleachers, a family dinner afterward where everyone beamed at your future. For Jake, it was exactly that. For me, it was another reminder of where I stood in the hierarchy of my own family. When Jake graduated with a 2.8 GPA, my parents treated it like a coronation. The driveway held a surprise, waiting under a giant red bow, a brand new Ford Mustang. The look on his face when he saw it, the way my parents clapped and shouted, it was pure theater, a scene pulled straight from a commercial about the perfect American family. Neighbors came over to admire the car, to congratulate my parents on raising such a great young man. But 3 years earlier, when I had graduated at the very top of my class valedictorian scholarships in hand, my gift had been luggage. A practical, stiff leather set handed to me with a rehearsed smile. "For your journey ahead," my mother said, as though she were seeing me off permanently. That night, Jake revved the engine of his Mustang in the driveway, the roar echoing down our quiet suburban street. My parents cheered like fans in a stadium. I dragged my new luggage upstairs, packed it with the clothes I owned, and realized the message couldn't be clearer. Jake was meant to stay. I was meant to leave. Even now, I can still see the look on my mother's face when she gave me that gift. It wasn't malice, it was dismissal disguised as encouragement. The smile didn't quite reach her eyes, because deep down she already knew my success was not a triumph for the family. It was a ticket out, and tickets out were dangerous things. What they didn't understand was that I didn't want to leave out of rebellion. I wanted to belong. I wanted them to see me not just as the capable one, but as their daughter, worthy of pride and celebration. Instead, they celebrated Jake for the bare minimum and sent me away with suitcases. It didn't stop there. Chores. By 16, I was cooking dinner 3 nights a week, managing laundry and keeping the household running. Jake at 12 didn't even know how to make a sandwich. Whenever I asked why my mother would give the same excuse, boys develop differently. He's sensitive, he needs more time. My father had his own script. The world is harder for young men these days. Girls have all these special programs and advantages. The irony stung. This was the same man who refused to pay my college application fees, but happily set aside money for Jake's future fraternity dues. That summer, when I left for college with 2 suitcases and $300 from my summer job, the Mustang was still parked in the driveway, gleaming like a monument to favoritism. My parents waved me off quickly, already discussing Jake's baseball practice schedule. My mother hugged me briefly, her parting words. "Not we're proud of you, but don't forget to call your brother. He's really going to miss you." Miss me, he barely noticed I was gone. Looking back, that graduation gift wasn't just about a car versus luggage. It was about symbolism. For Jake, the Mustang said, "Stay. You belong. You are the future of this family." For me, the luggage said, "Go. We don't know what to do with you here." And so I went. Not just physically, but emotionally. That was the day I stopped trying to earn what they weren't willing to give. The day I realized that if I was ever going to be celebrated, it wouldn't be in that house under that roof or within the walls of their expectations. Of course, I didn't say any of that out loud at the time. I was still too young, too hungry for approval, too naive to understand the full scope of their choices. But the seed was planted, and that seed would grow into something far stronger than they ever expected. Because when you're given luggage instead of a Mustang, you learn how to travel light. You learn how to leave without looking back. And most importantly, you learn how to build a road of your own. If there's one thing my parents were skilled at, it was justifying the unjustifiable. They had excuses ready for every imbalance, polished like lines from a script they'd rehearsed for years. And no matter how flimsy those excuses sounded, they wielded them with absolute conviction. When I complained about the endless list of chores assigned to me, cooking 3 nights a week, managing laundry, helping with yard work. While Jake lounged on the couch, my mother would sigh with theatrical patience. Boys develop differently, Claire. He's sensitive. He needs more time to find himself. Find himself. At 12, Jake didn't know how to crack an egg. At 16, he still couldn't fold a shirt. But apparently his sensitivity exempted him from responsibility, while my strength condemned me to carry double the weight. My father's justifications cut even deeper. He often sat me down, his voice heavy with authority, and said things like, "The world is harder for young men these days. Girls like you have scholarships, programs, advantages. Jake doesn't. He needs more from us." The irony stung every time. This was the same man who refused to pay my college application fees, dismissing my ambitions as fancy private school dreams, while proudly saving for Jake's fraternity dues before he'd even graduated high school. And yet, no matter how absurd their rationalizations, I absorbed them. Because what else could I do? I was a teenager, desperate for approval, trained to believe that if I just worked harder, cleaner house, higher grades, bigger achievements, they would finally notice. So I cooked, I cleaned, I excelled. I even taught myself how to bake my father's favorite desserts from scratch, hoping the smell of fresh pie might earn a rare smile or word of praise. But praise never came. What came instead was the familiar refrain, "Jake needs us more." Over time, that phrase became a cage. It excused everything, his laziness, his failures, his lack of direction, while invalidating every ounce of my effort. It made me question whether independence was truly a strength or just a convenient excuse for them to neglect me. The more they defended Jake, the more invisible I felt. When I voiced my hurt, my mother would stroke my hair and say, "You're so independent, Claire. You don't need us the way he does." At the time, it sounded almost flattering. But beneath it was a chilling truth. In their eyes, my needs didn't matter, because I was too good at surviving without them. That realization carved a hollow space inside me. It's one thing to be overlooked by strangers, but to be consistently dismissed by the people who are supposed to know you best, that's a wound that doesn't close easily. I learned quickly that no achievement could tip the scales. Straight A's, leadership roles, community service hours, it all dissolved in the shadow of Jake's mediocrity, which was somehow celebrated as progress. He was the project. I was the proof. And projects in my parents' world were worth investing in. Proof didn't need attention. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if my parents even realized the damage they were doing, or if they were so entrenched in their story about Jake that they couldn't see anything else. Maybe it was easier for them to cast me as the self-sufficient one, the daughter who didn't require effort while pouring everything into their fragile son. But here's what they never understood. Independence forced too soon isn't a gift. It's abandonment dressed up as praise. And their excuses, those polished, rehearsed defenses of favoritism, didn't make the imbalance less real. They made it permanent. That was the dynamic that defined my teenage years. And as much as it hurt, it also sharpened me. Because when you grow up hearing that you don't need support, you learn to stop waiting for it. You build your own scaffolding brick by brick. And one day you realize you've constructed something far sturdier than the crumbling pedestal your brother has been balanced on. Of course, I didn't know that yet. At the time, all I knew was that my parents had 1,000 excuses for why Jake deserved everything, and none for why I deserved even the bare minimum. And those excuses would echo in my head long after I left that house. By the time I was packing for college, the pattern was undeniable. Jake would always be cushioned, and I would always be pushed. My parents contributed exactly $0 to my education. Instead, they reminded me that they were saving for Jake's future. So I became my own safety net. I worked 3 jobs at once, morning shifts at the campus coffee shop afternoons, in a local office filing paperwork, and late-night tutoring sessions to scrape together enough for tuition and rent. While other students spent weekends at parties, I spent mine pouring lattes, stapling reports, and explaining calculus to freshmen. My schedule wasn't a choice. It was survival. And yet something surprising happened. I flourished. Not because it was easy, but because the pressure forged me into something stronger. While Jake drifted through community college undecided and unfocused, I was building resilience in real time. Every paycheck, every all-nighter, every small victory became proof that I could not only endure, but excel. I still remember graduation day. Summa cum laude, double major in business administration and computer science. My parents showed up, but only out of obligation. They clapped politely as my name was called, then left right after the ceremony. Why? Because Jake had a summer league baseball game. My father glanced at his watch as I tried to tell them about the job offers I'd earned. My mother interrupted with a question that had nothing to do with my career. Have you met any nice young men yet? That moment stung more than I admitted at the time. I had carried myself through 4 years of relentless work, emerging at the top of my class. And still my parents reduced me to a checklist of outdated expectations. No acknowledgement of my grind, no celebration of my success, just more dismissal. But if I had learned anything by then, it was this: their approval wasn't coming, and waiting for it was a waste of energy, so I shifted my focus. My first job out of college was with a mid-tier tech company. It barely paid enough to cover my studio apartment and loan payments, but it was a foot in the door. I arrived early, stayed late, volunteered for the assignments nobody else wanted. Where my colleagues complained about workloads, I saw opportunities. Every project was a chance to prove myself, not to my parents anymore, but to me. The hours were brutal. 18 months of 80-hour work weeks nearly broke me, but then one of my ideas saved the company millions of dollars. Suddenly, the executives knew my name. I was promoted to team lead at 25, the youngest in the department's history. I celebrated quietly. A slightly bigger paycheck meant I could finally stop eating ramen for dinner every night. But when I called home to share the news, my father sighed and said, "Computers. I don't know why you didn't go into something stable like teaching." My mother's only concern was whether my long hours might scare away eligible men. That was when the hollow space inside me widened. Because no matter what I accomplished, my family never saw me. They never wanted to. Jake, on the other hand, had already dropped out of college, bouncing between part-time jobs, moving back home rent-free. My parents called it taking time to find himself. Looking back, I realized this was the turning point. The rejection at Christmas years later didn't come out of nowhere. It was the culmination of decades of dismissal, the final act in a script I had known by heart since childhood. But here's the paradox: as much as it hurt, that lack of support forced me to build muscles Jake never had to. It forced me to prove again and again that I could survive without a safety net. And one day that resilience would put me in a position my family couldn't ignore, even if they tried. At the time, though, I didn't know any of that. All I knew was that I was tired. Tired of working myself to exhaustion. Tired of pretending it didn't hurt to be invisible. And tired of waiting for recognition that would never come. So I did what I had always done. I kept going. Because if independence was the only role they would let me play, I was determined to make it count. The irony of my story is that for all their talk about Jake needing them more, it was me who ended up carrying the family name into rooms they never even dreamed of entering. By my late 20s, I had transitioned into a Fortune 500 company, leading projects that shaped entire industries. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. But the chasm between me and my family widened with every step forward. The more I achieved, the more out of place I felt in their world. At Sunday dinners, where conversation once revolved around Jake's latest efforts, my career was an afterthought if mentioned at all. I remember one evening in particular. I had just closed a deal worth $50 million for my company. My parents didn't ask a single question about it. Instead, they spent 2 hours discussing how Jake was considering starting a landscaping business. It was almost comical if it hadn't hurt so much. Here I was signing contracts that made headlines while Jake's daydreams were treated like gospel. When I brought it up, my mother dismissed me with her usual refrain. "You've always been so independent, Claire. We don't have to worry about you." At first I told myself it didn't matter. Recognition wasn't why I worked so hard, but deep down it did matter. Not because I needed applause, but because I wanted acknowledgement of the person I had fought to become. Instead, I felt like a stranger in my own family. The distance grew even sharper during the holidays. Every Christmas, I'd come home with carefully chosen gifts, things I knew they needed or wanted. But when it came time to open presents, my gifts were met with polite thank yous and quick glances, while Jake's offerings, no matter how small or thoughtless, were celebrated like treasures. One year, he gave my father a coffee mug with a joke printed on it. My father laughed so hard he nearly cried, while the professional-grade watch I had saved up for barely warranted a nod. It was then that I started to see the favoritism, not just as neglect, but as erasure. They weren't ignoring me by accident. They were choosing over and over to see Jake as the center of their world, and in doing so they pushed me further into the shadows. But if my parents couldn't see me, the world outside certainly did. By 30, I had been promoted to vice president. My name was appearing in industry magazines, and recruiters were flooding my inbox with offers. People who had never met me believed in my worth more than my own parents did. That contrast stung like salt in an open wound. Yet even as I climbed, I couldn't shake the longing. There was a part of me that still hoped irrationally for the day they would look at me and say, "We're proud of you." That longing was what kept me showing up at family events even when I knew I'd leave feeling invisible. It's a strange thing, isn't it? To be strong enough to stand alone in the world, but still yearn for approval from the very people who taught you not to expect it. That contradiction lived inside me, like a quiet ache. What I didn't realize at the time was that this ache was building toward a breaking point. Because no matter how much I achieved, my parents' favoritism had one inevitable destination: rejection. And when it came, it would cut deeper than anything I had experienced before. But in that moment before the storm, I carried on. I told myself their blindness wasn't my burden. I poured myself into work friends and building the kind of life I had once only dreamed of. And maybe, just maybe, I started to believe that success was the only language I needed to speak. Still in the quiet corners of my mind, a question lingered. If even my own parents couldn't see me, would success ever truly be enough? The breaking point didn't arrive with a dramatic explosion. It came quietly, wrapped in the ordinary, like a letter slipped under the door. It was December, and for once I had cleared my schedule weeks in advance. No late-night calls, no business trips, no excuses. This Christmas, I told myself, would be different. I was finally going to show up without distraction to prove that family still mattered to me, even if I didn't always feel it in return. I remember the exact moment the phone rang. I was in my apartment wrapping gifts. I had spent hours picking out a new grill set for Dad, a designer scarf for Mom, and against my better judgment, a set of high-end headphones for Jake. I wanted no excuses this year. No one could say I hadn't tried. My mother's voice was unusually soft when I answered. "Claire," she began, "about Christmas this year. We think it might be better if you didn't come." At first I thought I had misheard. "What do you mean better if I didn't come?" She hesitated. "It's just Jake's been going through a rough time. He's back at home again and we don't want him to feel overshadowed." Overshadowed. That word rang in my ears like a gunshot. My entire childhood had been built on the premise that Jake's struggles mattered more than my successes, but this was different. This was erasure, explicit and undeniable. I pressed her. "So you're saying my presence would, ruin Christmas for him?" Her silence was answer enough. I hung up without saying goodbye. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely set the phone down. For years I had endured the favoritism, the dismissals, the invisibility. But being told outright that my existence was an inconvenience, that cut to the bone. The apartment around me blurred as I sat there staring at the half-wrapped gifts. The ribbon curled like mockery, the paper glittering in a way that suddenly felt cruel. For the first time in my life, I felt not just excluded, but exiled. The next few days passed in a fog. Colleagues asked about holiday plans, and I smiled, lied, said I was keeping it low-key this year. Inside, though, I was unraveling. Every memory of being pushed aside came flooding back, every missed birthday acknowledgement, every brushed-off accomplishment, every laugh at Jake's mediocre jokes, while my milestones were met with silence. I thought I had built armor strong enough to withstand anything. But this rejection pierced straight through. I realized then that I had spent decades performing, achieving, striving, all in the desperate hope that one day my parents would look at me and see me. And now they had confirmed the truth they never would. It wasn't just about Christmas. It was about every year before every choice they had made that led to this moment. Their decision not to invite me wasn't sudden. It was simply the final expression of a truth that had always existed. And yet, in the quiet devastation of that December, something else stirred inside me. For the first time, I considered that maybe I didn't need their approval, that maybe I had been chasing a mirage all along. I didn't know it then, but being uninvited was the moment I stopped trying to earn a seat at their table. It was the moment I began building a table of my own. But first I had to survive the loneliness. Because that Christmas, as the snow fell outside my window, the world felt colder than it ever had before. I used to think heartbreak belonged only to romance, the shattering of trust between lovers, the silence left behind when someone walks away. But that Christmas taught me a different kind of heartbreak, the pain of realizing your family can choose not to see you, even when you are standing right in front of them. The days that followed were heavy. I went through the motions: coffee in the morning, work emails, evening walks. But everything felt muted, like the world had lost its color. My apartment, once a sanctuary, felt more like a waiting room where no one ever arrived. The gifts I had bought sat in the corner like ghosts of a celebration that never came. I considered donating them, but I couldn't bring myself to let them go. They were evidence proof that I had tried one last time. And yet somewhere in that bleak winter, something inside me shifted. For years, I had allowed their neglect to define me. Their silence had been the mirror I measured myself against. But in that quiet, I asked myself, why do I keep seeking validation from people who have already told me in 1,000 different ways that they won't give it? It was a terrifying question because it had only one answer: I didn't need them. That realization was like a crack in the wall I had been banging my head against. Light seeped through. If my parents couldn't recognize my worth, maybe the problem wasn't me, it was them. And maybe my life didn't have to revolve around proving them wrong. The thought was both liberating and devastating. Liberation because I finally allowed myself to imagine a life free from their approval. Devastation because it meant admitting I would never get what I had spent 3 decades chasing. And yet life has a strange way of giving you what you didn't know you needed. A few weeks later, while the sting of rejection still clung to me, I received a call from a colleague. "Claire, have you seen it yet?" he asked, voice buzzing with excitement. "Seen what?" "Forbes, check the new list." My heart skipped. I pulled up the article, and there it was, my name printed in bold letters under the top 30 under 30 in business. Recognition not just from colleagues, not just from my company, but from the world. For a moment, I just stared at it. The irony was sharp. My parents had deemed me unworthy of a Christmas seat, yet Forbes had deemed me worthy of being named among the most influential young leaders in America. The contrast was almost too much to process. And here's where the story takes a turn. Most people don't see coming when the news reached my family. It didn't bring reconciliation, it brought exposure. The world suddenly knew my name, my story, my achievements. People began asking my parents about me at church, in grocery store aisles, at neighborhood gatherings. "Aren't you Claire's parents? You must be so proud." From what I later heard, they didn't know how to respond. Pride requires recognition, and recognition requires honesty. And honesty meant admitting they had spent decades favoring one child while erasing the other. That was a truth they couldn't comfortably live with. I won't pretend the Forbes list healed me, it didn't. But it gave me something I hadn't had before: undeniable proof that my worth was real, independent of their blindness. It gave me the courage to stop asking for a seat at their table and to start setting my own. And here's where I'll pause and ask you, the listener. Have you ever chased approval from people who never intended to give it? Have you ever measured your reflection in someone else's broken mirror? If so, I want you to think about this. Maybe it's time to stop waiting for them to see you and to start building a life where you see yourself. Because the truth is, my story wasn't just about family rejection. It was about reclaiming the narrative. And trust me, the next chapter would prove just how powerful that reclamation could be. The morning after the Forbes article went live, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Emails, texts, LinkedIn notifications. It felt like my name had been set loose into the world, echoing in places I had never even imagined. Old classmates congratulated me. Former colleagues sent long messages about how they always knew I would make it. Even strangers reached out asking for advice. But the call I had been both expecting and dreading came 2 days later. It was my father. "Claire," he said, his voice stiff like each word cost him something. "We saw the article." I stayed quiet, letting the silence hang. "Your mother and I, well, we didn't realize your work had reached that level." There it was. Not pride, not love, just shock that the daughter they had overlooked had become someone the world couldn't ignore. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Where was this recognition when I stayed up late as a teenager finishing debate prep? Where was it when I walked across the stage to get my college degree alone because they didn't bother to come? Where was it when I sent them updates about promotions, deals, milestones, all met with lukewarm replies? Instead, I asked just one "why now?" He stumbled. "It's different when it's public, people are talking." That was the truth, raw and unvarnished. Their sudden interest wasn't about me, it was about the reflection of me on them. The same parents who had once told me not to come home for Christmas were now suddenly eager to reconnect, not because they saw me, but because others did. And then came the request. "We'd like you to join us for dinner, this weekend." I should have felt relief, maybe even vindication, but instead a strange calm washed over me. This wasn't an invitation, it was damage control, a chance for them to reframe the story before neighbors, church members, and extended family forced them to. Still I went, not for them but for me. I needed to face it head on. That Saturday I walked into the same dining room where years ago I had sat quietly, while Jake's every mediocre achievement was celebrated. The table was the same, the wallpaper peeling in the same corner, the smell of roast beef heavy in the air. But I wasn't the same. My mother smiled too brightly, her words rehearsed. "Claire, darling, we're so proud of you." It felt scripted, like a line from a play. Dinner was a blur of small talk. Jake was there too, quieter than I had ever seen him. He barely looked at me, his jaw tight, his fork scraping the plate like it was punishment. I realized then that my success had not only exposed my parents, it had exposed him. The golden child stripped of his shine. Finally, after dessert, my father leaned forward. "Claire, people are asking questions. We'd like to present a united family image." There it was, the ask. They wanted me to be their redemption arc, the daughter they could suddenly claim, the proof that they had done something right. I looked at them, really looked at them. For the first time I saw not authority figures, not unreachable ideals, but flawed people desperate to patch over cracks that had been spreading for decades. And I said simply no. The silence that followed was thick. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father's face reddened. Jake muttered something under his breath, but I didn't care enough to catch it. I stood, placed my napkin on the table, and added, "You didn't want me at your Christmas table. Don't ask me now to save your image. You can live with the choices you made." Walking out of that house, I expected to feel rage or sadness. Instead, I felt something I had never experienced before in that home freedom. For years, I had been chasing their approval like oxygen. But now I realized I had been breathing just fine without it. After that night, word spread faster than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't me who told the story. It was the silence at my parents' dinner table that told it for them. People notice things, especially in small towns where whispers carry further than shouts. The first ripple came at church. A woman I barely knew approached me afterward, her voice low but sharp. "Your parents bragged about your article, Claire. Funny though, I don't recall seeing them at any of your graduations." Her words weren't a question. They were an indictment. I shrugged, not wanting to fuel gossip, but the truth had a way of surfacing on its own. More neighbors began to ask questions, connecting dots that had always been there, but were now impossible to ignore. Why had Jake always been paraded around while I was rarely mentioned? Why had my parents acted as if they had only one child? Jake didn't handle it well. His carefully curated image, the golden son, the family's pride, began to crack. People who once congratulated him now asked awkward questions about me instead. At a local networking event, someone joked, "Guess brilliance runs in the family." Jake's jaw tightened and he left early. For him, my success wasn't just my own. It was a spotlight that exposed how flimsy his pedestal really was. As for my parents, the pressure mounted. They had built their social standing on a narrative of family unity, of raising a son who reflected their values. But the town was no longer buying it. At community fundraisers, people congratulated them on Claire's accomplishments, forcing them into smiles they couldn't sustain. The pride they tried to claim rang hollow because everyone knew they hadn't been there for me. The cracks turned into fractures. I later heard from an aunt that arguments at home had escalated. My mother accused my father of being too harsh, of never giving me a chance. My father blamed her for coddling Jake. And Jake, well, he lashed out at both of them, angry that the pedestal they built for him was collapsing under the weight of the truth. I watched from the outside, detached, yet strangely calm. For years I had been the one suffering in silence, bearing the burden of invisibility. Now the silence was theirs to bear. They were the ones under scrutiny, the ones dodging questions, the ones unraveling. And here's where I'll be brutally honest, I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little. Because I hadn't exposed them, their own actions had. They had written this story long ago when they chose favoritism over fairness, appearances over authenticity. My success hadn't created their downfall, it had simply illuminated it. But as freeing as it was to watch the shift, it also forced me to confront something bigger. What would I do with this new power, recognition, status, influence? It could all be wasted if I let it become just another weapon in the old family war. That's when I made a choice. Instead of engaging in their unraveling, I would build my career higher, build relationships with people who actually saw me, build a life that wasn't defined by the dysfunction I had been born into. The past had taken enough from me. It wasn't going to take my future, too. And yet, here's the part I didn't see coming. Choosing to walk away didn't end the story. It opened a door I wasn't expecting. Because when the dust settled, when the community stopped buzzing and my parents' perfect facade lay in ruins, someone else reached out to me. Someone I hadn't heard from in years. And what they had to say would change everything. The message came late on a Thursday night when I was still at my desk, buried under project notes and half-finished presentations. My phone buzzed, and for a moment I considered ignoring it. But when I glanced at the screen, my heart caught. It was from my grandmother. Not my mother's mother, the one who had always looked away when favoritism played out, but my father's estranged mother. The grandmother I hadn't spoken to in almost 15 years. Her message was simple. Claire, I read about you. I'd like to see you, please. I stared at it for a long time, torn between curiosity and caution. This was the woman who had stopped coming around after my parents fought with her over money and inheritance. I remembered her sharp eyes, the way she never backed down from an argument. My parents had painted her as cold, unforgiving, difficult, but now here she was reaching out to me. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet. We chose a small cafe on the edge of town. When I walked in, she was already there, her silver hair tied back, her hands folded neatly on the table. And when she looked up, I saw something in her eyes I had never seen in my parents' recognition. Claire, she said softly, almost as if testing the name. You're the spitting image of your grandfather when he was your age. Determined, stubborn, brilliant. I blinked, unsure what to say. She leaned in. Your parents never told you the truth, did they? And with that, the ground beneath me shifted. Over the next hour, she unraveled a story I had never heard. How my father had always been desperate for approval, competing with his older brother, my uncle, who had built a successful company from nothing. How my mother had resented anyone who outshined her socially. How when I was born I reminded them too much of the very traits they feared: independence, ambition, defiance. They wanted control, not equals, my grandmother said. Jake was easier to mold, you weren't. Her words pierced through years of confusion. Suddenly, it all made sense: the cold shoulders, the missed milestones, the endless praise for Jake's mediocrity. It hadn't been about love or worth. It had been about control and appearances. And then she added something I never expected. You're the one I've chosen. I frowned. Chosen for what? She smiled faintly. My estate, my legacy. Everything your parents expected Jake to inherit, I want it to go to you. You've proven you don't just carry the family name, you carry its strength. The air in the cafe seemed to freeze. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just about money, though there was plenty of it. It was about rewriting the family narrative at its core. I shook my head, overwhelmed. Why me? Why now? Because you've already done the hardest part, she said. You broke free. And now you can build something better, not out of bitterness, but out of truth. Her offer sat between us like a live wire. Accepting it would mean claiming everything my parents and Jake believed was theirs by right. Rejecting it would mean walking away from a chance to finally decisively break their grip on the story. As I left the cafe, her words echoed in my mind. You carry its strength. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her face, her certainty, the weight of the choice now in my hands. For years, I had been cast aside as the unwanted daughter. Now I was being asked to become the heir, the one to carry forward not just wealth, but history. And deep down I knew I couldn't ignore it. But what I didn't realize then was that saying yes would ignite a firestorm I wasn't prepared for. Because the moment my parents found out, the fragile image they were clinging to would collapse completely. And Jake, he wouldn't take it quietly. When the papers were signed, the storm began. I thought I had time. My grandmother and I had agreed to keep the new will quiet until everything was finalized. But secrets don't survive long in families like mine. Somehow, Jake found out. Maybe he overheard a conversation. Maybe my mother rifled through something she shouldn't have. However it happened, the truth hit them like a grenade. I came home from work one evening to find my father waiting outside my apartment building, his face red with fury. "Do you think this is a game, Claire?" he barked. "You're tearing this family apart." I kept my voice calm. I didn't ask for any of this. Grandma made her choice. But he wasn't listening. His hands shook as he jabbed a finger at me. "That money, that house, that company, it belongs to Jake. To us, not you." And then came my mother, sweeping in behind him with tears streaming down her face, clutching Jake's arm like a stage actress playing to the crowd. "You're ungrateful," she cried. "After everything we've given you, you go behind our backs to steal from your own brother." The accusation sliced deeper than I expected. Not because it was true, it wasn't, but because I realized in that moment they would never see me as anything other than a threat. Jake, silent until then, finally spoke. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned. "You think you're better than me, don't you? You always have. But you'll ruin everything. You don't know what to do with her legacy." "I do." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Jake, you couldn't even manage a summer internship without Dad pulling strings. What exactly do you think you're going to do with an empire?" The words slipped out sharper than I intended, but it was too late. His face crumpled, and for the first time in my life, I saw the boy behind the golden mask. He wasn't angry because I was taking something from him. He was angry because he knew I was right. The shouting drew a crowd. Neighbors peered from windows, some stepping onto the sidewalk. For years, our family drama had been whispered about in private. Now it was playing out in full view. My father tried to corral us back inside, but the damage was done. Jake shouted louder, my mother wailed, and I stood in the center of it all, strangely still. I realized something then: their power over me was gone. They could scream, accuse, even threaten, but they couldn't erase what my grandmother had written in black and white. For the first time, I was the one holding the pen. The confrontation ended with my father spitting words I'll never forget. "If you go through with this, you're no daughter of mine." I expected it to hurt, but instead it felt like release. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the city humming beyond my window. I replayed every word, every accusation, every tear. And then I thought of my grandmother's voice, calm and steady. "You carry its strength." For years I had begged for their recognition, their approval, their love. Now I realized I didn't need it. What I needed was to claim the life I was meant to build, no matter how violently they resisted. But deep down, a sliver of unease lingered. My parents had always played dirty to protect Jake. If they couldn't win with words, what would they try next? Because one thing was certain: they weren't going to let go without a fight. I thought the worst had already passed. After all, what more could they do than scream in the street, throw accusations, and disown me with words they didn't even mean? But I was wrong. The next week, the retaliation began. It started subtly, emails from business contacts I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly resurfacing, warning me that my parents were spreading stories, that I was manipulating an old woman for her fortune, that I was unstable, greedy, dangerous. Then the calls came. My grandmother's attorney told me that Jake had filed an emergency motion contesting the will, claiming undue influence. My parents showed up at the firm too, making scenes in the lobby, waving their last name around like a weapon. But the sharpest blow came when I walked into a networking event downtown, expecting a normal night of handshakes and introductions, and found myself ambushed. My uncle, the successful one my father had always resented, pulled me aside. "Claire," he said carefully, "I don't know what game you're playing, but your parents are telling everyone you're trying to cut Jake out. It's ugly. People are talking." The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. My family wasn't just attacking me privately. They were dragging me through the mud, publicly turning every professional room into a battlefield. And then came the confrontation I'll never forget. A week later, I was summoned to a mediation session. My parents, Jake, and their attorney sat across the table from me and mine. My father leaned forward, his voice low but venomous. "You think this is about money? It's about loyalty, blood, legacy. You don't belong in this family if you side with her." My grandmother wasn't there. She had refused to subject herself to the circus, but her absence made the room colder. Jake slammed his fist on the table. "You've always been a parasite, Claire, feeding off our name, trying to outshine me. Now you're just exposing what you've always been." I stayed quiet, my attorney urging me to let the paperwork speak. But inside, something was boiling. I was done being silent. I looked Jake dead in the eye. "You've been handed everything your entire life, and what have you done with it?" "Nothing. Grandma didn't choose me because she pitied me. She chose me because she knew I could build something. Because I already have." The room went still. For a second, even my parents faltered. And then my mother whispered the words she thought would destroy me. "You'll regret this. Families never forget betrayal." But in that silence, I realized something sharp and liberating. They weren't afraid of betrayal. They were afraid of irrelevance. The mediation ended in chaos, voices raised, papers thrown, threats made. Nothing was settled. But as I walked out, shoulders squared, I felt strangely calm. Because I had already won something bigger than money or property. I had stripped away the illusions. Their favoritism wasn't love, their control wasn't loyalty, their threats weren't destiny. And yet, just as I let myself breathe, my phone buzzed. It was my grandmother's attorney again. His voice was tense. "Claire, we have a problem. Someone leaked confidential documents, details about the estate plan, financials, everything. It's online. And it's spreading fast." I froze. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was about to become a scandal. And if I didn't handle it carefully, it wouldn't just cost me my family. It could cost me everything I'd fought to build. The leak spread like wildfire. By the time I woke up the next morning, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Friends, colleagues, even distant acquaintances were forwarding me links to blogs, social media threads, and news blurbs dissecting every piece of my grandmother's estate plan. Strangers on the internet were suddenly self-appointed judges debating whether I was a schemer or a victim. The comments were vicious. "Entitled brat trying to steal from her brother. She manipulated her grandma for money. No wonder her family hates her." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I scrolled. All the private details of my life twisted into a spectacle for clicks and gossip. My parents had found the perfect weapon: humiliation. But what they didn't expect was the truth to fight back. Later that afternoon, my grandmother's attorney called me in. He looked exhausted, but there was a spark in his eye. "Claire," he said, sliding a folder across the desk, "this leak might actually save you. Because whoever released it included everything, even the letters your grandmother wrote explaining her decision." I opened the folder. Page after page of her handwriting. Words she'd meant only for me, but now the world could see her faith in me, her disappointment in Jake's arrogance, her hope that I'd carry her values forward. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Journalists who had mocked me hours earlier were now quoting my grandmother's letters verbatim. Strangers were posting online, "Wow, she really trusted her granddaughter. Sounds like the brother was the problem all along. Respect to Claire for staying strong." Jake's tantrums, my parents' accusations. They all looked smaller now, pettier against the backdrop of my grandmother's unwavering words. And that's when I realized this was my chance to end it once and for all. The following week, I held a press conference. Nothing flashy, just me, a podium, and my grandmother's letters. Cameras clicked, microphones crowded in. My voice shook at first, but then it steadied. My grandmother believed in me when no one else did. She chose me not out of pity, but out of trust. I didn't ask for this fight, but I won't back down from it either. Because her legacy deserves protection, and I deserve to stand in it without shame. The silence afterward was electric. For the first time, I wasn't just defending myself, I was claiming my ground. My parents, of course, tried to strike back. They released statements, staged interviews, painted themselves as the wronged ones. But their desperation was obvious. The public wasn't buying it anymore. The harder they fought, the clearer it became this wasn't about justice. It was about control. A month later, the court upheld the will. Jake's contestation was thrown out. The estate transferred to me fully without condition. I wish I could say my family accepted it, that we reconciled. But the truth is, they didn't. My father hasn't spoken to me since. My mother still sends guilt-laden letters. Jake unfollowed me on every platform and pretends I don't exist. But here's the thing, I'm at peace with it. Because for the first time in my life, I'm free. Free from their shadows, their demands, their expectations. Free to honor my grandmother's trust the way she intended. And that I've come to understand is the real inheritance. Not the house, not the money, not the company, but the freedom to choose my own path. So if you've ever been told you don't belong, that you're not enough, or that your worth is tied to someone else's approval, remember this: you don't need their permission to own your story. And if this story resonates with you, don't just walk away. Stay with me. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and join this space where we strip away illusions and talk about what really matters: family loyalty and the courage to stand alone. Because the next story I'll share, it just might change the way you see your own life. When I look back now, the storm feels both distant and strangely formative. What once seemed like the collapse of everything I knew, the betrayal, the public shaming, the courtroom battles, turned out to be the foundation of something I never thought I'd have clarity. I used to think family was about titles, about who claimed you and who didn't. I used to think love was measured in approval, in whether you were invited in or pushed away. But the truth I've learned is quieter, deeper. Family is not just blood. It's not just legacy. It's the people who stand by you when standing costs them something. My grandmother understood that. She didn't leave me her trust because I was perfect or because I earned it through some test. She left it because she saw who I was becoming, even when I doubted myself. That's the gift she gave me, not money, not status, but the mirror of her faith. I won't pretend it's easy. Holidays are quieter now. There are empty chairs where laughter used to be, and sometimes I still catch myself wishing they'd call. But peace isn't always loud. Sometimes peace is the soft certainty that you are no longer living on borrowed approval. So I've chosen to honor her legacy not just with what she gave me, but with how I live. Building with intention, loving without conditions, choosing presence over appearances. And maybe, just maybe, that's the inheritance we all deserve, not wealth, not control, but the freedom to define what family means on our own terms and the courage to live it.